to Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Gerard. And what an honour to speak to so many people across the globe as well. I really appreciate that. We've actually just come home from the UK, and we were in Qatar for a little while, in Italy as well. I was visiting my brother and my son actually in Oxford, and chatting to a couple of professors at Oxford and Cambridge universities about the future of education. So a wonderful trip. Now I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you can see that. Gerard, can you tell me that you can see compelling leadership now?
Points of trust and how to get it. Compelling leadership.
Fantastic. All right. Well, my passion as an educator and as a leader is the whole notion of trust and the importance of trust and the effects it actually has on learning and our well-being, and then how to actually get it as a leader. So it's an interesting question. The presentation I'm giving tonight, I'm trying to get it down into half an hour. I do a 3-hour workshop for schools or for conference settings. So if you're ever interested in that, please do send me an email. More than happy to have a conversation about that for you. But a little bit about me before we kick off too far. See, let's go back. This is me here on the left-hand side. This photo was taken a couple of years ago now, but it's in Tanzania. And on the right-hand side there is Chief Umar. Now, I've never come across a click language in my travels before. I've travelled quite a number of countries, but I had the real privilege of visiting Chief Umar, who's the chief of the Hadzabe tribe on the edge of the Serengeti in Tanzania. Now, the reason I was visiting Chief Umar was because I was visiting my brother. My brother is a doctor in Africa. He has a book published called A Doctor in Africa. He's far more influential than I am. He's my younger brother, mind you. But he there works for Catherine Hamlin, if you've ever heard of Hospital by the River and the work that Catherine Hamlin does with fistula surgery. So he's worked there for about 20 years now. And on this occasion, we're visiting Andrew, and he took us on a trip out into the Serengeti region, and we visited Chief Umar for the morning. And here is the chief with his men sitting around a fire, and they'd caught a dik-dik, or a small deer for those people who don't live in the African continent, and they were having it there for breakfast. Now, I've never had dik-dik for breakfast, and we had to graciously accept a piece. And then we went back to our campsite. I made sure Andrew had some worming tablets so we could continue on in our trip and enjoy the rest of the trip. The chief then took us hunting. And he proudly showed us his pigeon that he actually caught. And apparently that was going to be for lunch. Fortunately, we didn't stay for lunch. We continued on with our trip. But my brother Andrew lives in a town called Arusha, which is the gateway to the Serengeti. And while we were there, we also visited this lady here, Gemma Seisler. Now, if you haven't heard of the School of St. Jude, I really encourage you to Google it and look it up. Gemma Seisler is quite a remarkable woman. She comes from a small country town in New South Wales in Australia. She called Armidale. She left there when she finished school, and she went to Tanzania. She visited there, and she came back with a vision. And her vision was to start a school for the poorest of the poor children in that region. She realized that so many children in that country did not have access to education. So she was passionate about that. And she raised the sum total of $10 through Rotary Club in Armidale. And then she went back and she actually started this school in 2003. She opened the doors then, and we were there the first year that Year 12s had graduated. And this picture here is a picture of the new class of Year 1. Now, these children get to go to this school for free. She has an entry exam, so she chooses just the most academically able, and she takes just one child from each family. And the reason she does that is because she believes that she can have a broader impact on literacy and numeracy, because then these children will go home and teach the whole family how to read, write, and add up. All of these children are sponsored by families in Australia to attend this school. Now, why do I tell you the story of Chief Umar and Gemma Seisler? Well, I tell you the story because both of those people are leaders. And the point is that we're actually all leaders in our own places and communities. My favourite definition of leadership is by Ken Blanchard. And he basically says that whenever we're seeking to influence another person, We're actually in the act of leadership. So if you ask someone to go to the movies, you are influencing their decision-making processes. You're in an act of leadership, and hopefully they go along with you. If you're a teacher in a classroom, you're actually leading a group of children. We are all leaders at some point in the day. Some of us have leadership positions, and I would argue carry out that incredibly well, while others don't carry it out particularly well. And over my years as a leader and studying leadership, I've come to realize that leadership is about just two things. It's a complex act, but it's a simple act as well. It's about vision and it's about trust. This evening or this morning, wherever you are, I'm going to be talking just about the notion of trust. Now, this is part of my story. If you were to look at the picture of this man, what do you see? And I don't want you to respond or put anything in the chat. Just reflect for a moment. What do you see? Now, as Gerard said, I was the founding principal of a school in Canberra called Bergman Anglican School. And I grew that school from 24 students. And today it has 2 campuses and some 1,700 students. And I moved to St. Paul's School in Brisbane in 2008. And I was aware of some of the history of the school, but I wasn't completely aware of it. The school had a horrid history of sexual abuse. There were 2 predators that operated at the school, one in the early 1980s, and he was a music tutor, and then this man. This man was employed as the school's counsellor between 1989 and 1997 when he was discovered and took his own life. Now, this man was meant to be the most trusted person on the school campus. He was the counsellor. He was the person you went to when you had an issue and you poured out your heart to him in confidence. But he systematically abused over 150 boys during his time at St. Paul's School. Before that, he was at Brisbane Grammar and he abused at least 150 boys there. I had his diaries in my office and there are over 1,500 names in those diaries. It's more than likely he's the worst pedophile in Australia. Now, I moved to St. Paul's School in 2008, and I came from a school that I had established, and so that school reflected who I was, what my values are, and I enjoyed a culture of trust. And I moved into St. Paul's School not really understanding the culture, the history, and I was asking people to trust me. Now, why wouldn't they trust me? I'm a person of integrity. I'm honest. I think I'm a person of good character. And so naively, I just expected to trust me because of who I am. And yet they didn't. Because of the history of the school and the trauma that had occurred, trust was missing from the organisation. It's a little bit like air. We don't notice trust until it's missing. When air is beautiful, we enjoy it, but when it's fouled, we notice it and then we appreciate what we did have. Now, this man, Thomas Sergiovanni, who was an academic researcher in the States when he was alive, said this comment. He said, "It's vital to build trust before you do anything else, even before you develop a vision and a strategy. Trust is the most important thing a leader needs to develop." But the question is, what is trust and why is it important? Now, I'd get you to do an exercise if you're in a workshop with me, but for now, very, very quickly in the chat, can you put in there, what do you think trust is? Define it and write a couple of words in the chat. I'll give you just 30 seconds. Some great words coming through there. And maybe later on you can scroll back and have a look at those. Now, when you look at those, And if you listen to other people describe trust, you will probably notice that there's significant differences between each person's understanding of what trust is. And this is really important. You cannot actually describe or define trust. We can't have an agreed definition for it because it is a socially constructed phenomenon. And by that, I mean it only exists when people come together in relationship. It's the same for leadership. Leadership doesn't exist unless there is more than one person and they come together in relationship. And because we each have our own life experiences, we will describe trust in a different way through the lens of that experience. So for some people who put a comment in the chat there, it's about communication, clear, honest, open communication. For others, about being transparent or being vulnerable. For me, it's about care, knowing that a person genuinely cares for me. For a person who's been through a terrible divorce and has been betrayed, it's all about confidences. They describe and define trust through the lens of that experience. And because we're all unique people and have our own life story, we will each describe trust and have expectations of our leader in the notion of trust differently. Important to remember. Now, I don't know whether anyone's been bungee jumping here. Don't know whether you want to admit to that. I've never been bungee jumping, but I have been parachuting. I did a static line jump years ago when I first finished school. A couple of friends and I, we were raising money for a youth group, for a charity, and we decided we'd get people to sponsor us by the number of feet that we actually fell. So we went to a place called Wilton on the south side of Sydney, and we spent the day training. And then in the afternoon, we signed a waiver to say if we die, it's not their fault. Then we got into a tiny plane and the door was missing. We got into the plane, it took off, it came over the jump site and they hooked our ripcord onto the plane, so when it came time to jump, the ripcord would be pulled automatically. Now it was my time to jump, and I shuffled over the edge. I was that petrified and busting to get out of there. I actually jumped before the plane was slowed down, and the instructor told me it was ready to actually go. I was out of there. And because of that, I didn't think about checking my parachute. After 4 seconds, you're meant to check that your parachute's fully open. And if it's not, you're meant to open your reserve chute. Now, I, being too petrified and getting out of there, my parachute didn't open for 10 seconds. It was really quite an interesting experience. Speaks a lot about my notion of trust and where I'm at as a person and who I value and believe in. But if I was to ask you to describe what trust isn't, we would all probably come up with this list of words really, really quickly. Vanessa Hall, the trust lady, has done a lot of research, and these are the top words that people use to describe what trust isn't. Very easy to describe what it's not, hard to describe what it is. Did I trust myself in that plane? Did I trust the instructor? Did I trust the parachute? Interesting questions to reflect on. Now, while you can't define trust, there's actually a lot of research around the impact of trust, its benefits. So Putman, a social researcher, and Tashana Moran, an educational academic in the States, have both said it improves people's willingness to collaborate and cooperate together. So for teachers, that's really important. We love to collaboratively plan, and people won't be willing to actually do that unless there's a culture of trust or a relationship of trust between people. It enhances the openness and health in an organisation or an organisation's culture. And many of us have probably heard some people comment that when you walk into a school, you get a sense of what that school's like immediately. You can't put your finger on it, but it's the culture, how it feels, how people interact with each other. Well, trust really improves that culture. Paul Zak, he's a neuroscientist in the States as well. He's done a lot of work around the neuroscience of trust, looking at the chemical interactions in your brain, what happens when you are trusting someone, when you're not. But he has found that organizations that have high levels of trust find that staff are 74% less stressed. They've got more energy at work. There's higher productivity, fewer sick days, less burnout. The impact of trust on our well-being and our willingness to give and work for an organisation and attain a vision and its goals increases dramatically if there's a culture of trust. Perhaps you're thinking about your organisation at the moment, thinking, yep, not a lot of trust in my organisation. I know exactly what you're talking about. Probably the most pertinent piece of research was done in the early 90s. Now, it is a long time ago, but it is still relevant today. So in the early 90s, in the Chicago district of the US, the authorities there implemented a new Reform Act into the schools, and they wanted to know whether it was having an effect. So they engaged these two academics, Brick and Schneider, to work out whether their new policy was having an impact on student outcomes. They did a longitudinal study, and what they discovered was that the Reform Act was actually having no effect, no impact. But remarkably, what they did find was that schools with high levels of trust within their organisation, their culture, the students, there was a 1 in 3 chance of them gaining more than 12 months of learning in that year period. So it was having a real impact and effect on student learning. And conversely, schools with low levels of trust, there was nowhere near that chance of students progressing that 12 months in each year. It's really powerful in terms of student learning. Now, this guy, Daniel Goleman, says that the way we lead, the way we turn up in our classrooms, or the way we turn up to lead our faculty, or the way we lead our schools, or the way we lead our corporation or organisation accounts for a 70% impact on the culture of that organisation. You have a remarkable effect on student learning by the way you turn up and how you develop a culture of trust. So my PhD research that I did back in 2013, triggered by my experience at St. Paul's School when I discovered that trust was absent, was to ask this question. Now, if you don't know much about St. Paul's School, it was 1,500 students from prep to year 12. We have an international school. It was spread across 125 acres, a huge campus. So as the headmaster, I was walking up to 8 kilometres a day visiting people where they worked. And I basically wanted to know whether that was going to have an effect to turn the culture around. So I asked this question: what leadership practices contribute to the creation and maintenance of trust? And so to do that research, I did it in 2 parts. And the first part was to identify 4 highly trusted transformational school leaders. And then the second part was to go into their schools and shadow them, interview staff, and then see what they were doing to develop trust. Now, I use the theoretical framework, transformational leadership. Now, as leadership is a socially constructed phenomenon, there are actually over 30,000 definitions of leadership. But I like the definition of transformational leadership because my view is if you're not taking an organisation or a classroom from where it currently is to somewhere different, developing it and changing it, making it better, then you're actually not leading. You're just managing. And there's a difference between leadership and management. We need good management, but leadership is about transforming what is into something different. Hopefully something better. Now, you can measure transformational leadership and you can measure trust. Can't define it, but there is a very reliable tool to measure it. Now, 19 schools returned statistically reliable data in the first part of my research. So these are the 19 schools, their data. So essentially, if you look at that graph, any score over 0 meant that the person was trusted. So nobody in the research wasn't trusted. But you can see that it's not a question about whether you're trusted or not. It's a question of how much you are trusted. So I was particularly interested in these 4 leaders. Obviously, they were trusted far more than the person in position number 1. So what were they doing to have that much trust in them? Now, the other interesting thing about this is it destroyed some of the myths around trust. We think that trust is built over time. You bank credits and then you make withdrawals. That is not true. So the person in position 1 had been in their school as the principal for 17 years, whereas the person in position 19, also 17 years. But the person in position 17 there had only been in their position for 1 year. Trust had nothing to do with tenure and everything to do with what they were doing, their practice, things that you and I can learn to get better at. Now, the other interesting thing here is 2 of these were female, 2 were male, 2 were introverted, 2 were extroverted. Had nothing to do with gender or personality. Again, it had everything to do with their leadership practice. Now, you can measure trust in the organization. These are the 4 questions that the tool uses to measure trust in the organization. These are the data of those same 19 schools in the same order. So those 4 schools at the right-hand side there of the graph, there were the schools that I was interested in studying. So you can see from the data that organizational culture is affected by trust. And trust can be diminished or fostered by the behavior or the actions of the leader. So when you're looking at correlations, if you know anything about statistics and mathematics, the closer the score to 1, the stronger the correlation. So there was a very strong correlation here between trust in the leader and trust in the organization. Now, Brick and Schneider had done this work, but just for your interest's sake here, these are the data from the NAPLAN results for the school with the lowest level of trust when I did my study in 2012. For those people in different countries, when you read these data here, as a school, you don't want to see pink or dark pink because that means that you're behind other schools of similar socioeconomic backgrounds. What you do want to see is light green and dark green because that means you're doing much, much better. This is how the data was presented back in 2012. Now, I'm not a believer and proponent in standardized testing and showing the data, but nonetheless, this is interesting. These are the data from the school with the lowest level of trust. These are the data of the school with the highest level of trust. So this casual analysis that I did here supported Brick and Schneider's work. Trust was having a real impact on student learning, a positive impact on student learning. Wouldn't have thought, would you? Now, there was also quite a strong, almost direct correlation between trust and transformational leadership, which really supported Thomas Herdivani's comment there that you have to build trust before you transform an organization from where it is to where you want it to be. Nobody's going to get on the bus and go on the journey with you unless they trust you. So the second phase of my research was to go into each of the schools for a week, interview staff, survey them again, interview their chair of council. I then did a cross-case analysis between all 4 schools, and I was able to identify 10 practices that were common between all 4 leaders. Now, again, I stress these are things that you and I can learn to get better at. Regardless of our personality, our gender, our situation, our background, these are things that you can do to get better at. Now, the other thing I need to stress here too is that remember the comment I made about trust being a socially constructed phenomenon? It means different things for different people. When I run a workshop, I'm often asked, which of these are the most important? Are these in order? And the answer is no. Each of them are equally important because we each have our own life story, our own understanding of trust, and our own expectations of our leaders. So for me, 1 or 2 of these practices are more important to engender my trust in my leader. They are different to somebody else, but nonetheless, these are the 10 practices that are evidence-based that you can focus on to get better at your leadership. I'll give you a few seconds to write in the chat, what do you think some of those practices actually are? A couple of seconds to write in the chat there.
Yes.
Some great responses coming through. Quite a few of you have got a few of them. So good on you. All right, let me race through these practices now and share them with you. I'll give you a snippet, a snapshot at them. All of these are in my book, or you can find them on my website as well. So let's have a look at them. The first one is to admit your mistakes. This is a bit counterintuitive because leaders are so filled sometimes with ego and this whole perception that we've got to be right. We're the leader now, so we must know everything, and people are looking to us for guidance and support, and therefore we must have all the answers. Well, it's interesting. That's not what people are looking for in their leaders. What people value more is humility and vulnerability. Highly trusted leaders are willing to admit their mistakes publicly, apologize for them, but then move further and fix the problem. So staff in schools, when I spoke to them, they told me I really appreciated when the principal stood up in front of all of us at the briefing and said, look, I'm sorry, everyone. I got that wrong around that public holiday date. Sorry to cause you stress. I'm going to fix it now for you. Highly trusted leaders are willing to be vulnerable and admit their mistakes. Offer trust. I'm sure if I was to ask you, do you enjoy being micromanaged? You would probably say, definitely not. We are all employed as professionals. Of course, we appreciate mentoring and coaching and some guidance and feedback, but we don't like it when people interfere in our jobs. We want to be trusted. And one of the best ways to engender trust in somebody else is to offer them trust. Now, when I was first a principal of a school, I found this really, really difficult. I'm actually trained as a primary school teacher. So Bergman started as a prep to year 3 school, and we added a year level on each year. And so we had 24 students to begin with, and I taught a multi-age 1, 2, 3 class. 24 students, as I said, and I decided that we put on a school play that year. Now, I'm not a drama teacher. I have no idea what I'm doing, but we had put on a school play at my previous employment, Jib Gage in the Southern Highlands. I can't remember, it was something about a wolf. So we made the costumes, we practiced the moves, practice. We invited the parents in, we put it on. I thought it was really good. It was a great success. The following year, the school had grown to 76 students, and I had employed a teacher who was a drama specialist. Now, I gave him the opportunity to run the school play, but I tell you what, it was really difficult to bite my tongue and sit on my hands and watch him do what he did, because the way he did it was completely different to the way that I went about it. And I was petrified it was going to be a failure. And some of us are often caught with that whole notion, if you want a job done well, you're best to do it yourself. Well, as a leader, unfortunately, you're going to have to take some risks and sit back and bite your tongue, because if you interfere and micromanage people, you will not be building trust. You have to offer trust. Be there to support and mentor and guide and coach, but offer trust. Listen. And a lot of people put that in the chat there. A really powerful way of building trust is to listen. Now, I learnt this through the Royal Commission experience. St Paul's School was a case study into the Royal Commission into institutional responses of sexual abuse, and our public hearing was in 2015. And we'd spent 2 years gathering 100,000 pieces of evidence to send to the Commission, and then we had a 2-week hearing. And I made the decision to go to that hearing every single day and sit and listen to the stories. And on the last day, I was given permission to stand and give an apology for what had actually happened. Well, the next day, I was inundated. 3 to 4 victims of abuse or members of their family were contacting me 7 days a week, all the way up to Christmas Eve. It stopped on Christmas Eve and then started again on New Year's Day. 8 years later, I still meet with victims of abuse. I'm meeting with one tomorrow morning. And what I learned, though, through that experience is that they just want to tell their story. They just want to be heard and believed. Highly trusted leaders listen to understand. And when you listen to understand, there is an incredible risk for you. You could be changed. Your worldview might not be right. You could be wrong. Highly trusted leaders listen. Highly trusted leaders provide affirmation. They acknowledge their staff and thank them for what they actually do. It's a real motivator, actually, isn't it? If you get acknowledged and thanked for what you do. But I learned from somebody else when I was coaching them that one of the best ways to thank somebody is not just to say, thank you so much for putting on that play, really enjoyed it, is to actually point to the difference that that person made in another person's life. As teachers and educators, we're in the game because we want to make a difference. And so when you acknowledge people, it's more powerful to say, gosh, when I watched that play the other night, I saw John as he got up on the stage. He's such a shy kid normally, but gee, he beamed. And he really shone that night. And I spoke to his parents afterwards, and they were incredibly proud. You have made such a difference in that person's life. Well done. Highly trusted leaders thank their staff in powerful ways. Make consultative decisions. Highly trusted leaders involve their staff, their team in the decision-making process. Now, there are three ways of making a decision: a decisive decision-making process where the leader just makes the decision, and rarely should that happen. It should only happen in an emergency situation. And then there's a consultative and a collaborative decision-making process. Now, for staff, when they told me their stories, they didn't really care around the consultative or collaborative. What they really appreciated, what really built trust, was that when the boss was looking at implementing something in the organisation that would affect their work, they sought their opinion. How do you think this is going to work for you? I want to hear your point of view so I can make a great decision. How many times has something been implemented in your workplace and you knew it was going to fail, but nobody ever asked your opinion? Highly trusted leaders make consultative decisions. Be visible. Now, as I said, St. Paul's School was 125 acres, 1,500 students, over 200 staff. I was spending 8 kilometres a day, or walking 8 kilometres a day. Was that having an effect? And my studies showed me, yes, it was. Getting out of my office and being visible was having an effect on trust in a positive way. It means that people can engage with you. They can see the expectations modeled by you that you want them to emulate. You're there for connection. You're there going to assemblies, to the performances, to the chapel services. You're doing the duty. You're there and you're visible. Highly trusted leaders are visible. Very hard to trust someone you never see. We often hear that whole notion or policy of an open door policy. And I think it's a bit of a nonsense in the sense, because my office at St. Paul's School was at the top floor of a building on the far right end side. It was way out of the way. My door was open and I expected people to drop in, but it was so out of the way, nobody was ever going to pass and drop in. So for me, an open door policy meant when my door was open, I wasn't in my office. I was out visiting people where they worked. I was trying to be visible. Be consistent. Highly trusted leaders have a consistent, calm demeanor. Now, you can be consistently inconsistent, and for some people, it's difficult to know who you might wake up to in the morning and what sort of mood they might be in, or when you knock on your boss's door, the principal's door, hard to know what sort of reaction you might get when you actually tell them what's going on, whether they're just going to lose the plot and be upset and angry, or whether they're going to be calm, or what sort of person they might be that day. But highly trusted leaders have the ability to control their emotional state and just be cool, calm, and collected in any situation. And their team know that when you go to them, you are going to be open and listen to them and be there to support them to solve the problem. You are consistent in all that you do to be trusted. Coach and mentor. Highly trusted leaders are interested in others. It's a job of service. I was the principal. I had got there. My job then was to train up other people to take my place or become a principal in another school. It wasn't about keeping them in check and making sure they worked better than me. My job was to make them better so they could become the next generation of leaders. People really value and trust leaders that take an interest in their own professional growth, their career, and spend time supporting them, either mentoring them or coaching them or giving them opportunities to develop their skills. Care. This one really surprised me because I did this study in large school contexts, and I did it in large school contexts because I wanted to know what the practices were. I wasn't interested in the personality type because it's easy to develop trust when you're in a close relationship and you have the opportunity to get to know the leader closely. Much, much harder when you've got a school, a staff of over 200 people. I couldn't get to know people. So I was really intrigued to find that highly trusted leaders have a care for their staff. And now in this situation, it wasn't that they cared for every single staff member, but when staff told me that they cared, they told me stories of how they cared for one of their colleagues. When one of their colleagues lost their house in a flood, the principal would let them go home at 2 o'clock every day to get their affairs in order, to see the insurance company. They would take their classes while they were away on leave. They would turn up to the funeral of a colleague or be there to celebrate a wedding. These people genuinely care about others. For me personally, this is a really powerful way of building trust for me. When I know people care for me as Paul the person, then I'm willing to place my trust in them. And the last practice is probably the most obvious: to keep confidences. Now, the more you are trusted as a person or as a leader, the more people will tell you. And I've been told things I probably didn't really want to hear, but they will tell you because they trust you. But in that situation, I learned as a leader an important lesson, particularly as a male who wants to fix everything. When people tell you something, they often just want to debrief with
Thank
you and tell you.
you.
So I learned the lesson, the hard way, mind you, that I need to ask the question at the end: do you want me to do something about this, or are you just telling me because you want me to hear? Now, sometimes there might be a situation where somebody's at risk and you do have to act. So in those situations, you need to say to that person, look, I really appreciate what you've said. I value it, but I'm going to have to act and do something about it for this reason. But this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to support you in that process. So after I finished my research, I then developed a trust and transformational leadership assessment rubric. Now, for educators, you know what a rubric is. And I tested that across schools across the country. And it's a really reliable tool to measure trust and transformational leadership. The only thing it doesn't measure is the whole vision stuff. Now, you can find that automated on my website if you're interested. So my website, Compelling Leadership, there will give you some more information about it. I will say this website's a bit dated because if you did read about me on the web, I did lose my position as headmaster last year, and I'm starting a new venture tomorrow that we were hinted at. So I do need to update this website, but still you will find a free ebook there. You'll find information about trust, information about the workshops I actually run. So feel free to go onto that website. But I was keen to publish a book and share my learnings as well. So in 2020, with the University of Queensland Press, I published Principled. Now, my goal was to publish a book that would sit in airport bookshops. So people who were interested in business or management or leadership would pick it up and buy it. Now, it was published in March 2020. You know what happened in March 2020? The world shut down and nobody visited the airport bookshops. But nonetheless, it was still launched and published, and it's in its third edition now. So it's a book written for leaders in all spheres, not just teachers. It goes through all those 10 practices, gives you some tips about how to build trust and grow your leadership capacity. You can purchase that online. And the last thing I'll mention is, as was mentioned there at the beginning, is tomorrow, our team and I are launching a new enterprise called Vividus, Taking Learning Beyond. Vividus is a whole school learning platform or framework, teacher professional growth and progression tool, cross-school collaboration platform, and student learner profile, all focused on developing creative intelligence in young people, the skills and dispositions they need to thrive in a future dominated by AI. It's an incredibly exciting project that has worldwide application. Any curriculum can plug into it. So if you are interested, the website will be live at 12 noon Australian Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. Have a look at that. Perhaps go on to LinkedIn and follow me on LinkedIn, or link with me, or then follow Vividus as well, and you can get the latest news and information about Vividus. Gerard, I'm going to stop there. I've just gone over time just by a little bit. So time for you to actually speak, and then I'll have a look at a couple of questions and attempt to answer some of those questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. All right. So very briefly, I'll talk about Matific itself, and mainly what I want to do is give people an update about Matific. So now we can really describe Matific as a foundation to Year 9 online digital maths platform, although I will say that we're in the early days and years, possibly even with our foray into the high school. Certainly, if you search by topics right now, you will find we have a growing number of activities for Australian years 7, 8, 9, New Zealand years 8, 9, 10. So Matific can be accessed by students on a computer through a browser or through a mobile device like an iPad through our free Matific student app. They have a login and they have 24/7 access, provided they have connectivity and a device. There are certainly thousands of adaptive activities. I used Matific as a teacher in its first year, 2016, and it has a lot more activities now, but it was the quality of the activities that drew me to Matific even then. What I was looking for was a platform that simply didn't give me worksheets that went ping. I wanted activities that exemplified pedagogical best practices, that gave students support in solving a problem, that put maths in context, that gave them virtual manipulatives, that gave them visual models. And that's what drew me to Matific. And not only now do we have thousands of more activities, but the platform itself has developed enormously. So we have alignment to various curricula around the world by which you can search for and assign activities. But we've also been tapping into AI increasingly so that we can take the load off teachers by having the software really delivering the right point of time activity for each individual student on their personal learning path. The reason why Matific is so pedagogically sound is because it's designed by world-leading experts from around the world, from people in universities like in my home state, University of Queensland, in the United States, places like Berkeley. So I really encourage you to have a look at Matific by looking at our website, doing a free trial, getting us to do a demonstration for you if you're unfamiliar with it, and talking to others who do have Matific already. So for everybody, just an update on just some of the many exciting features that are coming out this term and next term. In the past, the assessment and reporting aspect of Matific has really just focused on things like what scores students got with the activities, how they're going with completing their activities on time, how many stars have they earned in order to work out perhaps who to award the trophies we give schools that they can award to the Matific Star Class of the Week, or to give certificates to students. We do have a placement test report which tells you a bit more information about what the questions were about that the students succeeded with and had difficulty with. But now we're adding a whole new dimension. What we're adding are 2 great new reports that are being released in the next month. And those reports are going to give you more diagnostic information. So while students are having fun doing mathematics, they will be in the background being assessed without them having to have some high stakes, anxiety-inducing, time-consuming big test. So you'll be able to go in and see for various concepts how many of your students are at various year levels. And when you click on these buttons, it'll take you in and show you who are the 7 students here. that are only operating at between year 1 and 2 level on multi-digit numbers and place value. Then they will have the student mastery report, where the circles will turn progressively green as the activities the students are completing are indicating that the students have mastered a particular concept. And they'll be yellow where they're still working towards the concept, and they'll remain grey when we say we just don't have enough data to actually make a judgment. We'll also be, during the course of the year, then having reporting for school leaders at the school level. So you'll be able to get a learning report for your whole school. Now, one of the ways in which we're tapping into AI is that we're allowing teachers in this year to nominate what their current teaching focus is, so that not only the activities they directly assign to students are on the focus of what their class lessons have been on, but the activities that the artificial intelligence is assigning to the students also is not only at the right level, but is tied to the topic that you've been focusing on. So at the moment, a student in year 4 who we've been able to determine is only operating at year 2 level will get year 2 activities, but where you may be teaching subtraction at the moment, the student perhaps might be getting addition activities. That's getting addressed through the work our wonderful team have been doing. And for the students, there's more coming too. If you're not familiar with Matific's extrinsic reward system, the students have an avatar that they create, and they earn rewards through doing not just activities and getting answers right, but reattempting activities, logging in consecutive days, and so on. And they get to dress up that avatar, change their clothing, outfits, and customize their aircraft. So we're adding lots of extra new features there and different colors and so on, so that the students have much more creative control over their avatar. If you're concerned that the students might get caught up doing that all week instead of their maths, teachers have control over this. That was one of the new features we added earlier this year. Teacher can go in and say to the students, I've locked the avatar customization feature, or perhaps many of the other features we have, until you have completed your scheduled activities, until you're up to date with all due activities. So I've got through that fairly quickly, Paul, just trying to catch up that time. So I can be ready now to hand back to you. Let's just...
Not a problem, Gerard.
Stop my share. Alrighty,
All right. So if I look through some of the questions here, Gerard, and I'll just respond to them accordingly. And feel free if you have any other questions. I'm sure Gerard will monitor that and watch that and ask it for you. Somebody's asked, or a couple of people have asked about recommendations for books to read. What I can do, I have an extensive library and bookshelf and some little favourites, is I'll send a list of books that I can recommend people to Amrita, and Amrita, I'm sure you can distribute those on your network or contacts there. So I'm happy to do that. Really interesting question about blind trust and a coach around saying, yeah, you just need to trust me. Well, blind trust, that's an interesting question in the sense that, as I mentioned, each of us have our own life stories. Now, me personally, only up until recently, I've been very naive as a person, and that's just the way, in a sense, my upbringing has resulted in that sort of personality where I wasn't betrayed, I wasn't hurt deeply, didn't have my trust destroyed. So I'm quite a naive and naturally trusting person because of that. So for me, blind trust is, I tend to trust people at face value. And that's probably a good thing and a bad thing in a way. My wife is converse to that, and she often says, don't trust that person. And I thought, well, why not? I quite like them. They're nice. And she always tends to be right. So you kind of need to understand yourself, I would say. First of all, are you naive like me, or are you suspicious of other people, and why is that the case? So it's really important to understand yourself. And I always say, as a leader, the first thing of leadership is knowing who you are, knowing what you value, what you believe, what drives you, what motivates you, what presses your buttons, etc., etc. As a leader, you can't naively trust people, but then again, you have to. It's this interesting tension and paradigm, and I went through a bit of a nightmare journey with this whole Royal Commission stuff. because you end up being suspicious of everybody. And I ended up realizing I couldn't live life like that. I actually had to see the good in people and trust them. But if a leader says to you, just trust me, blindly trust me, well, I think they're a bit silly because yeah, they need to prove themselves, particularly if you don't trust people naturally. Uh, Somebody asked a question that's kind of related to that, where you've got casual staff, people going in and out of the organization. How do you build trust there? Well, I would say don't stress too much about that. Build the stories and be trustworthy with the practices. And people will tell the stories who are more permanent. This is a person who can be trusted. They will attest to your character. And it's that sort of comments and conversation that you'd really love to know is, what are people going to say about you when at your eulogy? What's your character like? And you'd often don't hear that. And so, but you do want people to actually tell those stories. So if you do have staff rotating through and you don't see them very much, it is really important to build that reputation that you are a person who's a person of trust, because these are the things you actually do. Uh, Somebody asked me about my slides. No, I don't give away my slides. Sorry. I do give away a lot of material on my website, and you can get a lot of information in my books there. So I'm sorry, but I do keep those to myself. Uh, Somebody asked about the workshops that I do. Yes, I do workshops, and I've done workshops all around the world. The most popular workshop is a 3-hour workshop. And I'm going down to Melbourne to do that in 2 weeks' time to 100 principals down there again. It's always best in person because trust is a relational thing. It's about building relationships. And in a workshop situation, I help people to build relationships with somebody they've never met, help them to be vulnerable and share their stories. And as a result, identify their strengths and weaknesses and where they need to grow as a leader. So I don't do a lot of talking. I facilitate, if you look at it that way. So I spoke tonight because I had to speak online. During COVID, I did do the workshop online. It worked quite well, interestingly, but as long as I had a facilitator in the background to help people go into breakout groups, because I often get people to go out into breakout groups and talk and have conversations. I tend to go into schools. So a school might contact me and say, Paul, can you come and do a workshop for our senior leadership team or our curriculum leaders? More than happy to do that. Just send me an email on compelling leadership. I used to do that for nothing because I was paid by St. Paul's in my previous position. But for schools, I charge $1,000 plus GST for the 3-hour workshop plus expenses. So I would say I'm not very expensive to do that. And I'm more than actually happy to help that. I can't see any other questions, Gerard. Can you see any other questions there?
There was someone was saying curious about the 11th common practice in your study.
I don't think I said lemon. Did I? There's 10 practices. Somebody has said
So what
about
was the
integrity.
yeah?
And that,
Did the profile attribute risk takers feature in the study? Was the other part of their question.
sorry, can you read
Uh,
that again, Gerard?
so it says, did the profile attribute risk takers feature in the study?
No, it didn't. No, it was all about what those leaders were doing as a transformational leader. And as a transformational leader, I would argue you have to take some risks because there's a danger in transforming an organization. Lots of risks inherent in that. But I was interested in the whole notion of trust. What do they do to build trust in themselves? Somebody's asked about integrity, and made a comment. And usually I would say at the beginning there too that I wasn't interested in my study of words like integrity or honesty because they are virtues, they're character traits. I hope I'm a person of integrity and honesty, but how do you actually demonstrate that? Where's the evidence? Yeah. And the evidence, I would argue, from a leadership perspective, are these practices. So my assessment rubric helps assess or provide the evidence of how good you are at each of those practices.
I've got one that was directed to me, Paul, just about Matific. So the Matific platform, accessed by a browser on a computer or through an app on a mobile device, there is scope with the mobile device to download activities and do them offline. The downside of that, though, is there's no data then captured on how the students performed on the activities. But there is an option to do them offline through an iPad, for instance. I might do some summing up. I was glad Paul, to hear you say that he was your younger brother, wasn't it? Is he the youngest of the
Yeah.
family?
Yeah, a funny story around that, Gerard. Yeah, he's my younger brother.
Mm.
Not that we're competitive at all. So as I said, I launched my book, and the launch party was at a coffee shop. And I mean, I did have Peter Dutton there. He came along because he was a past student. So I had one dignitary there, which was good. And I had some great endorsements for my book, including Tim Costello. But then, of course, we had COVID, and yeah, nothing really happened. My brother then goes and publishes a book, and he has the launch event at the Opera House, and he gets Princess
Right.
Anne to endorse his book. So not that I'm competitive, but his book's doing
Well,
incredibly well.
as the youngest of my family, I've always subscribed to the view that parents keep having children until they've perfected them and then they stop. So, well to go, way to go, Andrew.
Yeah, well,
Glad to hear
that's
you
true in
mention.
this case. He's a remarkable man. And if you are interested, a Doctor in Africa is his book, and it tells his story, what the work he's actually doing. Extraordinary work.
It's not actually true in my case. It's my second eldest brother's the one who got the Order of Australia medal, not myself. But in mentioning the School of St Jude, I have heard Gemma talk years ago at the wonderful St Mary's in Exile community in South Brisbane, and that was one connection I had with that. But also when I joined Matific, I found that Matific had provided free tablets for the students there to work on
Wow.
for that particular school. The point you were saying about we're all leaders reminded me of something I remember I picked up from a great maths educator, Brian Tickle, and Brian used to very much bring home the point to the students that they are all teachers. And I used to very much in my classroom say that you're all teachers and teachers are also students. We've got to learn from each other. But my parents, when my mum in particular, when she talked about trust, she used to say, only trust your parents in your pocket. And sadly, we know that some poor kids can't even trust their parents. So it is a hard thing to trust. I tend to be like you and be very trusting. But I was watching the show Yellowstone, and Kevin Costner's character, John Dutton, he was sort of saying, I don't trust anybody until they've earned it. So interesting, different perspectives on it there. Regarding school culture, I visited so many schools with Matific and other jobs I've had over the years, and you feel the culture in the school. When you go in these sorts of jobs, and especially in the staff room. And I remember being at one Brisbane girls' private school once where it was just this wonderful warmth at the time in that staff room. And when I spoke to the teachers, they were calling their head of primary something like Mr. Wonderful or something like that. And Wayne was name obviously had struck the right chord there with his teachers. Ego and humility, I also think were great things for you to talk about, because it's very hard for when we talk about our political leaders, they say, there's a fine line between we want them to be confident but not arrogant. And where do you sort of, stop at that point? But after reading a bit of Eckhart Tolle, I always thought, it seemed to me that ego is the root of most problems in the world, and if people could just be more humble. So nice to think about humble leaders. As for the listening, well, my wife says that there's two things I need to do to be a good husband. One is to listen better, and the other, no, I don't think I heard what she said. The other one was. Anyway, so a little joke to finish the night. And of course, they say that they don't care what you know until they know how much you care. So obviously, you care a lot, and teachers in particular at the moment need a lot of care, not just the students. If we see people really struggling with the demands of the job. In terms of everyone tonight, just say thank you a minute over time. So yes, you will all receive the recording. In fact, everyone who registered for the session will get a recording. So if you missed a point, you'll be able to go back and revisit it. And certificates will be issued upon request. So email those to australia@matific.com. So thanks to Amrita and Emma in the background. But most of all, Paul, we've got some hands raised,
Can
including
I
your own.
can I finish off tonight, Gerard, with a quote, my favorite quote about leadership, and just share that?
Yes.
It's by Hugh Mackay, and he wrote it in a book called The Good Life. And he says, leadership is an example of the life lived for others, because as any truly effective leader knows, leadership is the ultimate form of service to a community, organization, or society.
Yeah,
Really
no, that's
appreciate
one.
the opportunity to actually speak to everyone tonight. So thank you, Gerard.
All right. Thank you, Paul. We'll say good
Thank
night to
you.
everyone. Have a good evening or good day wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Just Natalie, I see you had hand raised. If you still want to unmute yourself and ask the question, please do.
Okay, I'm just going to allow them to talk. Meanwhile, you can, Gerard, share the survey, maybe if somebody's interested.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Good point, Amrita. So I'll just share the screen again.
Hello.
Yes. All right. Go
I would
ahead.
like to know if the course is added to an ESSA account.
The question there for you, Paul, if you're still there. I'm just. It's my slideshow. I'll just bring that back. Not sure if Paul's still there with us, but if you're still with us, there's a couple of more QR codes. The first one's just if you're interested in a Matific demonstration at the moment, one of our school leaders in Queensland, Mark Hansen at Sandy Strait School, has produced a nice little book called Math for All, and it's about getting the message out to students that you don't have to be a special person to do maths. Yes, it may come more naturally to some people, but we can all do math if we're just supported to learn in the right way. So hopefully you've had a chance to grab that QR code. Sorry, and I'll just go back to the previous one. And then for the survey to get your feedback on the webinar and any ways in which we can improve. I'll just check. Oops, sorry. Just going to bring back the assessments there. Not sure if Paul's still there. Sorry, so maybe that question might have to be sent
Paul is not
directly.
there, Gerard, but we will take up all the questions for Paul later. So you can drop an email to australia@matific.com and we will get back to you with an answer. But it'll be nice to have your response on how you like the webinar through the survey.
Thank you. So I'm just bringing that QR code back up in case you still need it there. I'll let it sit there for a moment until we think everyone's had a chance to scan that and answer those few little questions. Still 179 people online, so I'll leave that sit there for a moment. Just check if there's any other questions too. Oops, sorry. Thank you, Cam. There you are. And Rita, with the recording, does it have a time limit on it once it's shared, or do people have it indefinitely?
Recording can be sent tomorrow. The recording that's on YouTube right now, you're talking about that, Gerard?
Well, they're just asking for how long the recording will be available. Sometimes recordings have an expiry date. You know, you have
No,
to view
it's
it
going to
within
be
30
available
days.
on YouTube. It's going to be available on YouTube forever.
Indefinitely? Okay.
Definitely, yes.
Okay, but that answers that one. The questions for Paul. Just Q&A and just try the chat. Out of the way the QR code. Yeah, at Matific, that should be. Just write that again. Right. Australia@matific.com. Lots of thank yous. You're most welcome, and we thank you for giving up your time to join us. New message. Thanks, Katerina. Nice to hear. He's very good, isn't he? We had a overwhelming response for this webinar. So lots of people who obviously want to hear what Paul had to say but couldn't join us at this particular time. But we live in an on-demand era. So I'm sure they'll enjoy the recording. Yeah, that A is lowercase. It just the typing converted it. I don't know if it'll matter with the A in Australia. The email keeps bouncing back. I presume that means. So did I get Australia@matific.com and Rita? Should be right.
Sorry, what are you saying, Gerard?
Somebody, yeah, Sharon right there. It keeps bouncing back. But what's on the screen there now saying Australia@matific.com?
This
That's
looks
the
fine.
email address for the certificate. Yeah. If it doesn't work, you can email me and I'll pass it on. So mine's just Gerard@matific.com, GERARD, Gerard@matific.com.
I can share my email ID as well. I'll just
You're welcome, Peter. We're up to 111. All the ones. Oh, just went up a number. Participants are increasing. That's unusual. It's saying that it's no longer valid. Do you mean the QR code? Interesting. Sharon, you mean the email address? Do you want to try sending your email request to me? I'll just write mine. Yeah. Just stop capitalizing. If you send it to me, I can make sure it's passed on to get that certificate to you. We've got hands still raised, is that right? Yes. Hand is raised. Right, I'll get that out of the queue after. All right, well, might end the meeting. Just again, if you're got any questions that need to follow up with, just email them through to us. Yep. So, provided Ruth, you you've registered, and you must have, because you're on the meeting. There'll be it may take us a few days to get it out to you, but in the next week, look out to see the recording emailed through to you, and then you can enjoy seeing it again, but also perhaps sharing it with others who might watch it with you then. But thank you very much. And if you're in South Africa or Africa in general and interested in Matific, contact Natalia over there. Or if you're in New Zealand or Australia, you can contact me. And if it's not me who directly responds to you, be my colleague Dee. But we'd love to show you more about Matific and why we hope that you will trust us with it being the online student maths platform for your children. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.